When you think of Nintendo Switch Online, what is the first thing you think of? Let me rephrase the question here. What is the first piece of software you think of? I mean, fair enough, but that's not what I want to talk about in today's video. No, what I want to bring focus to is the retro console apps. They are arguably the main incentive to purchase a Switch Online subscription, other than to play online. You have NES, SNES, N64, Game Boy, and Game Boy Advance. Overall, a pretty solid lineup. Each of these apps act as a way to represent a Nintendo legacy console, which would make sense given that they are part of a Nintendo-based subscription service. So now that we have that Nintendo connection established, I have to ask, what's up with the Sega Genesis app? Don't take this the wrong way, the Sega Genesis is deservingly a beloved and iconic system, but it's clearly the odd one out here, right? Just looking at the console app icons, it's the only one that doesn't have a controller against a red background. In all honesty though, the strangest thing about this app, other than its odd existence, is the fact that it's seemingly forgotten. From what at least I've seen, no one talks about this app, and I really can't blame anyone, mostly because it seems that even Nintendo themselves have forgotten about the app, given that it's the only retro console app to not receive any new games this year. The last time it received a game update was in April of 2023. If I had to guess why nobody really cares, is because why should anybody care? I mean, it's the Sega Genesis app. Out of all of the consoles included with Switch Online, the Genesis is the only one to have several collections already, with one of them even being on the Switch. Most of these collections offer a decently varied and sizable amount of games. They aren't too expensive or hard to find, and once you purchase one, you don't have to keep making payments to play those games. When those collections exist, why would anybody want a Genesis collection locked behind a subscription? I'm well aware that I am not the first person to ask this question, as I recall several people were back when the Switch Online expansion was first announced. To many, it just came across as a way to justify having a $50 price tag, and I can definitely see why. I can tell you for certain that out of all of the consoles people were asking to be added to Switch Online, the Sega Genesis was not one of them, yet it was added anyways. So here we have an app that is both unwanted and forgotten by everyone. Everyone except maybe me. Now that might be obvious given that I'm talking about it, but why am I talking about it? Mostly because nobody else has really talked about this app, but also because there's some games I want to highlight. That brings us to the main goal of this video, to highlight 3 games within the Sega Genesis app included with the Switch Online expansion. Now I'm not going to sit here and tell you to go play Golden Axe or Sonic 2. I mean you can, but those are already very well known, and I want to bring attention to what I feel are overlooked games deserving at least checking out once. I'm sure many of you will have heard or played some of these games, but I'm willing to bet there are many that haven't. So strap in real good, because we're about to see what blast processing allows Sega to do what Nintendo don't. First, I feel we must start with a game from their most iconic series. It stars a blue animal saving smaller animals in need. Of course, I'm referring to the one and only Flicky, the first Sonic spinoff. Kind of. That's right, before Shadow the Hedgehog, before those Tails Game Gear games, we had Flicky. Well, actually, Flicky came out before not only those spin-offs, but also before the main Sonic series itself, releasing in 1984. Wait, does this mean that technically Sonic is a spin-off of Flicky? It's not important. What is important is the game itself. To give you an idea of what it plays like, it's somewhat similar to Namco's Mappy, which would make sense given that apparently the game was created to kind of capitalize on Mappy's success. For those unaware, in both you jump between different platforms to reach collectibles while avoiding or taking out cats. The difference here is that for one, you play as a bird, meaning that your jumps are way floatier. The rooms the levels take place in loop instead of having a start and end. This is because the end is actually the door in which you lead your collectibles to, and best of all, when you eliminate a dumbass cat, they actually take a moment to come back. Or they just don't come back, I wasn't really sure whenever I was playing. Overall, I've had a lot of fun with this one. At first, I struggled with it a bit, but once I got a hang of the gameplay loop, it became a blast. If you're a Sonic fan, I guess you could check out Flicky simply due to its connection to the main series, and if you're not a Sonic fan, don't worry, because Flicky has almost nothing to do with that series except the titular bird. Moving on, we have a game that I would argue is decently well known, that game being Earthworm Jim. Now, the reason why I chose to include this game is not because it's obscure, no, not by any means. The actual reason is because the way Nintendo went about adding the series is pretty interesting. You see, Earthworm Jim 2 was actually added to the service first, being added to the Super Nintendo app in March of 2022. It would take until September of that same year for the first Earthworm Jim to join the service, but that was through the Sega Genesis app. The reason why I find this so interesting is because of the well-known differences between the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo versions of both Earthworm Jim 1 and 2. If you didn't know, due to technical differences within each system, many multi-platform games of that generation varied depending on which console they released on. This meant depending on which console you played on, you would experience different music, different graphics, and different controls. Even if both versions of a game were the same to their core, many people would find themselves preferring one version over the other. In the case of Earthworm Jim, most will tell you that the Sega Genesis version of the first game is the superior version, and while there is some more debate regarding the second one, a good amount of people do prefer the Super Nintendo version. And then you just stay away from Earthworm Jim 3D altogether, cause no version is good. The main point I'm trying to make is that seemingly Nintendo intentionally added the versions that fans prefer. Now granted, I do think it would have been a lot cooler if they just included both versions of both games, but still. Regarding my actual thoughts on the game, I find it very groovy. No, but seriously, I do think it's a really solid run-and-gun platformer, if not a bit challenging. It controls great, and that's mostly due in part to the fantastic animation. If you haven't played this game yet, I highly recommend that you do. Finally, we have a game that here in the States was released exclusively on the Sega channel, that game being Pulseman. Now, the game being a Sega channel exclusive in the US kinda doomed it into being an obscure title over here, but that's not the only reason why we're including it. No, the main reason why we're including it is because not only is it an obscure title, it's an obscure title from a very well-known developer, that developer being Game Freak, the developers of Pokemon. That's right, before they were known for turning out Pokemon games every single year, Game Freak was known for doing stuff outside of Pokemon. I mean, they still do stuff outside Pokemon occasionally, but that's not the point. As for Pulseman itself, it's an action platformer that works as both a mix of Sonic and Mega Man. Or at least that's what IGN said. Admittedly, I didn't get too far in this one, although I would like to, as for what I played was really enjoyable. Despite its comparisons, the game has a very unique identity. The way Pulseman controls feels great, and the gimmick of charging up your attack by running is executed in a very cool way. You gain momentum with electricity surrounding you, then giving you the ability to shoot off a projectile. You can turn into an electric ball that ricochets off walls and lets you travel across wires. You can do whatever this is. Overall, at least from what I played, Pulseman is a very underrated game that is worth your time. I just wish I had more to say on it, other than how I hate its loading screen being its select icon. I hate when the Switch Online apps do this. It's just gross. Just stop. And I believe that's all we got for today. 3 games on the Sega Genesis Switch Online app. If you liked the video, feel free to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments regarding anything in the video, whether that be the Genesis app itself or the games showcased. And if you want to see more content by me, then why not hit that subscribe button. Until next time, have a good one.
Tails flies who knows how high, and Robotnik barely dodges disaster. There's even this sweepstakes thing, where 10,000 lucky folks will win free Sonic 3 cartridges. So if you're still looking for Sonic and his friends...
I need to report a missing hedgehog.